The receipt printed with its usual mechanical whir, $73.42 for organic produce and imported cheese, and Maya Chen's fingers moved automatically toward the register drawer before she noticed the handwriting bleeding through the thermal paper. Blue ink, pressed hard enough to leave impressions visible from the back. Words that didn't belong on a grocery receipt, scrawled in the white space beneath the transaction total. Maya's hand froze midway to the cash drawer as her eyes processed what someone had written during the brief moment she'd turned to bag the previous customer's items. Your son was kidnapped. Van outside. Act normal. The fluorescent lights of Hartwell's fine grocers hummed their midnight song, casting everything in that particular shade of artificial brightness that made reality feel slightly unreal. Maya's gaze lifted from the receipt to find the customer standing motionless at her register, a man whose presence had rearranged the store's atmosphere the moment he'd entered. Dominic Varro hadn't moved. His hand remained extended toward the receipt she should have already placed in his palm, but every muscle in his body had locked into a stillness that reminded Maya of wildlife documentaries, the moment before a predator strikes or flees. His dark eyes weren't focused on her anymore. They'd gone somewhere distant and terrible, calculating distances and threats in spaces she couldn't see. She'd noticed him immediately when he walked through the automatic doors 20 minutes before closing, the way everyone noticed Dominic Varro, whether they knew his name or not. Some people occupied space differently than others. He commanded it, reorganized it around himself like gravity bending light. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. His suit probably cost more than 3 months of Maya's rent, charcoal gray, and tailored with precision that spoke to measurements taken by hand rather than machine. His dark hair was cut close, silver threading through the temples in a way that suggested experience rather than age. And his face, angular and controlled, carried the kind of stillness that came from years of never allowing expression to betray intention. Maya had seen him before. Not in the store, but in newspaper photographs and local news segments, always positioned slightly behind politicians at charity events, or emerging from courthouses with lawyers flanking him like ceremonial guards. The kind of man whose name was spoken carefully, whose business interests were described in vague terms, whose enemies had a tendency to relocate or simply vanish. Chicago whispered about Dominic Varro the way medieval villages whispered about the lord in his castle, with fear dressed up as respect, with curiosity laced with self-preservation. And now he stood at her register at 11:43 on a Tuesday night, buying groceries like any other customer, except someone had written a warning on his receipt, and his 7-year-old son was apparently in a van outside the store where Maya had worked for the past 2 years. Her throat constricted as the reality of the message crystallized. Not a prank. Not a mistake. The handwriting was too deliberate, the timing too precise. Someone had planned this, had known exactly when Dominic Varro would be at this specific register, had waited for Maya to turn her back just long enough to alter the receipt before she could hand it over, which meant someone was watching them right now. The security cameras. Maya's peripheral vision caught their red recording lights, 4 of them covering different angles of the checkout area. Whoever had written that message had done so knowing they'd be captured on footage, which meant either they didn't care about being identified, or they'd already compromised the security system. Neither option made her feel better about surviving the next 5 minutes. Dominic's hand finally closed around the receipt, the paper crinkling softly in his grip as he read words meant to shatter a father's world. Maya watched his face for reaction and found nothing. Not a flicker of emotion, not a tremor of fear. Just that terrible stillness deepening into something that felt like standing too close to a frozen lake, aware that death waited beneath the surface. His voice, when he spoke, was calm enough to terrify her more than any visible panic would have. The previous customer. Describe them. Maya's mind raced backward through the fog of routine, grasping for details she'd barely registered at the time. Woman, maybe mid-40s, brown hair in a ponytail. She paid cash for a bottle of wine. Wore a gray coat, I think. She left through the main entrance about 2 minutes before you approached the register. Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only crack in his composed exterior. His eyes moved toward the store's windows, where the parking lot stretched empty beneath sodium lights, except for his black sedan near the entrance and, Maya now noticed, a white cargo van idling in the loading zone. Van outside. The words from the receipt echoed in her mind as cold understanding spread through her chest. That van had been there when she'd taken her break an hour ago, its engine running, its windows too dark to see inside. She'd assumed it was an overnight delivery waiting for the morning crew. Now she understood it had been waiting for something else entirely. For him. For this moment. You need to call the police. Maya kept her voice low, aware of microphones and cameras, aware of whoever might be listening from that van. If your son's really in there, police involvement will get him killed. Dominic's words fell like stones into still water, each one carrying weight that silenced her protest. The message says to act normal, which means they're watching for any deviation from expected behavior. If I make calls, if I show any awareness, they'll know their leverage has been communicated successfully. His logic was cold and precise. The calculated reasoning of someone who'd navigated dangerous waters before. Maya felt something shift inside her, the familiar comfort of routine giving way to the terrifying clarity of crisis. Then what do you do? She asked, hating the helplessness in her own voice. Just walk out there and hope they don't hurt him? Dominic's gaze found hers, and for the first time, Maya saw something human beneath the mask of controlled power. Rage, fear, the desperate love of a father confronting every parent's worst nightmare. It lasted only a second before he locked it away again, but that glimpse changed something in how she perceived him. Not just a dangerous man, a desperate father in expensive clothes. The receipt, he said, his voice dropping even lower. Who handled it between printing and reaching my hand? Maya's thoughts scrambled through the transaction's brief timeline. The receipt had printed automatically. She'd torn it from the machine, turned to place his items in a bag, set the receipt on the counter while she arranged the groceries, then picked it up again to hand to him. I put it on the counter for maybe 10 seconds while I bagged your items. That's the only window when. Her words trailed off as realization struck. Someone was behind me, at the customer service desk. I heard footsteps, but I didn't look. The customer service desk sat 6 feet behind Maya's register, normally staffed by a supervisor but empty at this hour. Anyone could have approached silently, written those words in the seconds her back was turned, and retreated before she faced forward again. Security footage will show them, Maya said, hope flickering despite the circumstances. We could check the monitors in the back office. Whoever did this already thought of that. Dominic's certainty was absolute, born from experience with enemies who planned every contingency. They're either wearing something to hide their identity, or they've already replaced tonight's recordings with doctored footage. This was coordinated, precise, professional. Professional. The word hung between them, heavy with implications that made Maya's stomach turn. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. Someone had studied Dominic Varro's habits, had learned that he stopped at Hartwell's on Tuesday nights when returning late from business in the suburbs, had positioned personnel both inside and outside the store. A kidnapping orchestrated with military precision. Dominic folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into his pocket, the motion unhurried despite the urgency screaming beneath his composed surface. His eyes swept the store one final time, cataloging exits and angles, before returning to Maya with an intensity that made her breath catch. What's your name? The question felt surreal given the circumstances. Formal introductions while his son sat captive in a van 20 yards away. Maya. Maya Chen. Maya. Her name and his voice carried weight it had never held before. In approximately 30 seconds, I'm going to walk out of this store and approach that van. Whatever happens next, you didn't see anything unusual tonight. I purchased groceries, I paid, I left. The receipt contained nothing but transaction details. She should have agreed. Should have nodded and let him walk toward whatever fate awaited beyond those automatic doors. Self-preservation demanded compliance, demanded she forget this night had ever happened. But Maya's grandmother had raised her to believe that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to act despite the terror turning your blood to ice. The loading zone has a blind spot. She heard herself saying, words tumbling out before wisdom could stop them. Camera 3 doesn't reach the far corner where deliveries are. Unloaded. If you approached from the right angle, they wouldn't have footage of whatever happens there. Dominic's expression shifted, something like surprise flickering through his controlled features. Most people avoided involvement with men like him. Most people looked away when dangerous situations unfolded, grateful to remain invisible to forces they couldn't comprehend or control. Maya Chen, midnight cashier at an upscale grocery store, was apparently not most people. Why are you helping me? The question carried genuine curiosity beneath its measured delivery. You know what I am. What I do. The smart choice is distance. Maya thought about her grandmother, who'd fled violence in another country, only to build a life in Chicago through sheer determination. She thought about the son waiting in that van, 7 years old and terrified, surrounded by people who saw him only as leverage against his father. She thought about all the moments when someone could have helped and didn't, about the silence that allowed evil to flourish. "Because there's a child in that van," she said simply, "and because someone trusted me with information that might save his life. Walking away now makes me complicit in whatever happens to him." The truth of her words settled between them, creating a bond that transcended the vast gulf between their circumstances. Dominic Varro, whose empire stretched across Chicago's shadow networks. Maya Chen, who worked double shifts to afford her grandmother's medication. 2 lives that should never have intersected, colliding in a moment that would reshape everything that came after. "The blind spot?" Dominic said, his voice carrying new respect beneath its controlled surface. "How far does it extend?" Maya visualized the loading area from countless hours watching deliveries through the store's back window during slow shifts. About 15 feet from the building's corner to where the dumpsters sit. Anyone standing in that zone is invisible to all. 4 cameras. Dominic processed this information with the tactical precision of a general absorbing reconnaissance. His hand moved toward his phone, then stopped as he reconsidered. They'd warned him to act normal, which meant surveillance extended beyond the van. His calls were probably monitored, his movements tracked. Every resource he normally commanded had become a liability. "I'm going to buy a pack of cigarettes," he said, the statement seemingly absurd until Maya understood its purpose. Normal behavior. The expected actions of a man finishing routine errands before heading home. "While I'm selecting a brand, you're going to take your scheduled break. Walk to the loading dock for fresh air, the way you do every night." How did he know about her break routine? The question surfaced and vanished as Maya recognized the answer. Men like Dominic Varro knew everything about their environments. He'd probably cataloged employee schedules, security patterns, and exit routes before entering the store. Instinct, rather than paranoia. The survival mechanisms of someone who'd lived with targets on his back for decades. "What am I supposed to do on the loading dock?" Maya asked, even as her hands began untying her apron with movements that felt disconnected from her racing mind. "Watch. Listen. Tell me everything you observe when I pass through that blind spot." Dominic's eyes held hers with an intensity that burned through her fear. "They have my son, Maya. They're expecting me to walk into whatever trap they've prepared. But they're not expecting a witness, someone outside their calculations. That's the advantage you're offering." The weight of what he was asking settled over her shoulders like a physical burden. Bear witness to whatever violence unfolded in that blind spot. Provide information to a man who might use it to kill the people who'd taken his child. Become part of a war she'd only ever observed from safe distances. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When you see evil happening and do nothing, you become part of the evil." "Okay." The word emerged steadier than she felt. "My break started 3 minutes ago, according to the schedule. I should be on the loading dock by now." Something shifted in Dominic's expression, a softening that revealed the father beneath the feared businessman. "If this goes wrong, if anything happens that puts you in danger, you run. Not toward the store, not toward the van, but straight down the alley to Clark Street. My people monitor that intersection. They'll find you." His people. The phrase confirmed what Maya had already understood about the scope of his organization. The infrastructure that operated beneath Chicago's visible surface. But the instruction also revealed something else. He cared about her safety, had already calculated her potential escape routes, was treating her as someone worth protecting rather than a disposable asset. Maya moved toward the employee entrance that led to the loading dock, her legs carrying her forward while her mind screamed warnings about every step. The door felt heavier than usual, its metal surface cold against her palms as she pushed it open into the November night. The loading dock stretched empty before her. Concrete platform raised 4 feet above the alley for truck access. The dumpsters Dominic had mentioned sat at the far corner, deep shadows pooling between them and the building's wall. The blind spot. Beyond the dock, she could see the parking lot's edge, could see the white van still idling in the loading zone, its shape somehow more menacing now that she knew what waited inside. Exhaust curled from its tailpipe, ghostly white in the cold air, a reminder that people inside were keeping warm while a child sat captive in their midst. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket, the sensation making her flinch before she recognized it as her regular alarm, reminding her to take medication for the anxiety she'd developed years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. All those therapy sessions about managing stress. All those techniques for calming racing thoughts. And here she stood, waiting to witness whatever horror was about to unfold. The automatic doors at the store's front entrance slid open, their mechanism audible across the quiet night. Maya pressed herself against the dock's railing, making her presence obvious to anyone watching while positioning herself to observe the blind spot from an elevated angle. Dominic emerged from the store with studied casualness, cigarette pack visible in his hand, his stride unhurried as he moved toward his car. Anyone watching from the van would see exactly what they expected: a man finishing errands, reaching for keys, preparing to drive away to wherever they wanted him to go. But his path angled slightly wrong. Instead of walking directly to his sedan, he was curving toward the building's corner, toward the loading zone, toward the blind spot where cameras couldn't follow. Maya's heart hammered as she watched him disappear around the corner, his tailored silhouette swallowed by shadows that suddenly felt absolute. 5 seconds passed, 10, 15. The silence stretched unbearable, broken only by the van's idling engine and the distant hum of late-night traffic. Then she heard it. A door opening. Voices, too quiet to distinguish words but sharp with tension. A child's cry, high and frightened, that pierced Maya's chest like a blade. Marco. The name Dominic hadn't spoken, but Maya somehow knew. His son. 7 years old. Terrified. She should have stayed frozen, should have remained a passive observer as she'd promised. But the sound of that child's fear triggered something primal, something her grandmother had planted in her bones decades ago. When you see evil happening and do nothing, you become part of the evil. Maya's legs carried her off the loading dock before conscious thought could stop them, her feet hitting the alley's cracked pavement as she moved toward the corner where Dominic had vanished. Her phone was in her hand, camera app opening with the muscle memory of a generation raised on documentation, her finger finding the video record button as she pressed herself against the building's cold brick. The scene that greeted her would live in her memory forever. The van's side door stood open, interior light spilling onto wet concrete. 2 men in dark clothing flanked a smaller figure, a boy with dark curly hair and terror-wide eyes, his wrists bound with zip ties, a strip of duct tape partially removed from his mouth. Marco, unmistakably his father's son, with the same angular features softened by youth. Dominic stood 3 feet from the van, his posture rigid with restraint that must have taken superhuman effort. His hands were visible, empty, raised slightly in the universal gesture of compliance. Whatever leverage these men held, it was enough to make Chicago's most feared businessman freeze in submission. One of the men spoke, words Maya couldn't quite hear but whose tone carried satisfaction, the smug certainty of someone who believed they'd won. Then everything happened at once. Dominic's hand moved faster than Maya's eyes could track, producing a weapon from somewhere beneath his tailored jacket. The first man dropped before Maya registered the sound of the shot, suppressed to a metallic cough that barely disturbed the night. The second man turned toward the threat, his own gun rising, but Dominic was already in motion, closing distance with the efficiency of someone who'd practiced violence until it became instinct. The second shot came from inside the van. Maya saw the muzzle flash before she heard the sound, saw Dominic's shoulder jerk backward as the bullet found flesh. But he didn't stop, didn't hesitate. His return fire silenced whoever had shot him, and then he was reaching into the van, gathering his son with arms that trembled despite their strength. "Papa!" Marco's voice cracked on the para word, small hands clutching his father's blood-stained jacket with desperation born from hours of terror. "Papa, they said you weren't coming." They said, "I'm here." Dominic's voice broke on the words, the controlled businessman shattering into raw fatherhood as he pressed his son against his chest. "I'm here. Marco. You're safe. You're safe." Maya stood frozen at the corner, phone still recording, capturing a scene that should never have existed yet somehow felt necessary to witness. 3 bodies on the wet concrete, a child sobbing in his father's arms, blood spread in patterns that the rain would eventually wash away. Then Dominic's eyes found her across the chaos, and Maya saw something in his gaze that would haunt her long after this night ended. Gratitude, recognition, the acknowledgement that her small act of courage, sharing information about a blind spot, had helped create the opportunity he'd needed. But there was something else too. Calculation, assessment, the awareness that she now knew things that made her dangerous to him and invaluable at the same time. She'd stepped into his world. There was no stepping back. The sirens came 23 minutes after the last shot, their wailing approach giving Dominic enough time to transform a crime scene into something that would never exist in official reports. Maya watched from the loading dock where he'd ordered her to remain. Her phone now powered off and tucked deep in her pocket, the video evidence feeling like a bomb against her thigh. 3 black SUVs had materialized within minutes of Dominic's single phone call. Men in dark suits moving with choreographed efficiency to remove bodies, scrub concrete, and relocate the white van to somewhere it would never be found. The bullet wound in Dominic's shoulder bled through his jacket, but he refused medical attention until Marco had been examined by a woman who arrived with a medical bag and the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to treating injuries that couldn't be reported to hospitals. Through and through, Maya heard her say as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. You're lucky it missed the artery by centimeters. You need surgery, Dominic. Real surgery, not back alley patchwork. Later, the single word carried absolute finality. Dominic's attention remained fixed on Marco, who sat wrapped in a blanket in the back of one of the SUVs, a cup of hot chocolate clutched in small hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Maya should have left, should have clocked out, walked to her car, and driven home to her grandmother's apartment where normal life waited. But every time she moved toward the employee entrance, something stopped her. The awareness that she'd witnessed things that couldn't be unseen. The understanding that her involvement hadn't ended when she shared information about the blind spot. It had only just begun. Cole Marchetti, Dominic's second in command, approached her with the measured stride of someone assessing a potential threat. He was shorter than his employer, built like a boxer past his prime, with eyes that cataloged everything and revealed nothing. You're the cashier, he said. Not a question. The one who told him about the camera blind spot. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady under his scrutiny. You recorded what happened. Again. Not a question. His awareness of her phone's activity during the confrontation spoke to observation skills honed over decades. I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking clearly. The video can be deleted. I'll do it right now. Maya's hand moved toward her pocket, but Cole's subtle headshake stopped her. Keep it. For now. His gaze moved past her to where Dominic was lifting Marco from the SUV, carrying his son toward a vehicle that had just arrived. A armored sedan, with windows dark enough to hide its occupants from the world. He'll want to speak with you before any decisions are made about evidence. The words carried implications that turned Maya's blood cold. Decisions about evidence. In Dominic Varro's world, such decisions probably extended to witnesses as well, people who saw things they shouldn't have. People who could connect Chicago's most powerful crime boss to 3 bodies in a grocery store parking lot. I should go home, Maya said, hating the tremor in her voice. My grandmother will worry if I'm late. She doesn't sleep well when your grandmother is being relocated as we speak. Cole's statement landed like a physical blow, stealing the breath from Maya's lungs. Along with your medication, your personal documents, and anything else that couldn't be left behind. The Castellano family will know about your involvement within hours. Staying in your apartment would be suicide. The Castellano family. Maya recognized the name from news reports and her own neighborhood's whispered warnings. They controlled territory on Chicago's south side, ran operations that intersected with Dominic's in ways that created friction and occasional violence. If the men in the van had worked for them, if this kidnapping had been their operation. I'm being hunted, Maya said, the reality crystallizing into something sharp and terrifying. Because I helped him save his son. Because you were seen helping him. Cole's correction was precise, clinical. The van had interior cameras. Backup surveillance in case the primary operation failed. They captured your face when you came around that corner with your phone raised. By morning, every Castellano associate in Chicago will have your photograph. Maya's legs weakened, forcing her to grip the loading dock's railing for support. 20 minutes ago, she'd been a cashier counting down the hours until her shift ended. Now she was a target. Her grandmother already displaced from the only home she'd known for 15 years. Her entire existence upended by a decision that had felt righteous in the moment. Where is she? Maya demanded, strength returning through, fear for someone other than herself. My grandmother. Where did your people take her? Cole's expression softened almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his professional facade. Somewhere safe, somewhere the Castellanos can't reach. She's frightened and confused but unharmed. Mr. Varro's instructions were explicit on that point. The woman who helped save his son does not lose family because of her courage. The relief that flooded through Maya was immediately complicated by the debt it created. Dominic had protected her grandmother without being asked, had anticipated the consequences of Maya's involvement, and moved to shield the people she loved. Such protection didn't come without strings. In his world, favors created obligations that could never be fully repaid. The armored sedan's door opened, and Dominic emerged with Marco asleep in his arms, the boy's face peaceful in a way that seemed impossible given the trauma of the past hours. His dark curls pressed against his father's wounded shoulder, small fingers still clutching the fabric of Dominic's ruined jacket. Maya. Her name and his voice carried exhaustion, gratitude, and something she couldn't quite identify. "You're still here." "Your man said I couldn't go home." The accusation in her tone surprised her. Directness that should have been tempered by the danger surrounding them. "Said my grandmother's already been moved without anyone asking if that's what she wanted." Dominic's expression tightened, but he didn't defend the action. Instead, he turned to Cole with a single instruction. "Take Marco to the house. Dr. Reyes stays with him until I arrive. No one else enters his room without my explicit permission." Cole accepted the sleeping child with surprising gentleness, cradling Marco against his chest as he moved toward the waiting sedan. The boy stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back into exhausted sleep. When they were alone, Dominic faced Maya fully, and she saw, for the first time, how much the night had cost him. Blood had seeped through the fresh bandage on his shoulder, staining his shirt in patterns that would require explanation. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and lines of tension bracketed his mouth that hadn't been visible earlier. He looked human, vulnerable, like a father who'd nearly lost everything and was still processing the magnitude of that near miss. "Your grandmother is at a property I own in Lincoln Park," he said, answering her earlier question. "Private nursing staff, security that rivals embassy protection, and a garden she apparently found acceptable despite her initial protests. She asked about you repeatedly. My people assured her you were safe and would join her soon." Maya absorbed this information, imagining her grandmother's fear and confusion as strangers appeared at their apartment with instructions to pack immediately. The woman had survived revolution and displacement before, had rebuilt her life multiple times, but that resilience had cost her in ways that never fully healed. "She has heart problems," Maya said quietly. "Stress makes them worse. If your people frightened her, they were gentle." Dominic's voice carried certainty that suggested he'd given explicit orders about his treatment. "One of them speaks Cantonese. Another brought her tea from the shop she frequents on Argyle Street. They understood she was to be treated as honored guest, not prisoner." The thoughtfulness of these details cut through Maya's anger, replacing it with something more complicated. He'd anticipated her grandmother's needs, had prepared for this contingency with care that went beyond mere efficiency. As if he'd known from the moment Maya shared that information about the blind spot that she would become entangled in his world, and had already begun protecting the people she loved. "You planned this," Maya realized aloud. "Even before the shooting, you knew I'd become a target and started making to arrangements to keep my grandmother safe." Dominic's silence was confirmation enough. Why? The question felt inadequate for the weight of what she was asking, but no better words existed. "You didn't know me. Didn't owe me anything beyond maybe a thank you and a generous tip. Why protect someone who could just as easily become a liability? If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." Dominic moved toward the loading dock steps, ascending with careful movements that favored his wounded shoulder. When he stood beside her, close enough that she could smell gunpowder and blood beneath his cologne, his voice dropped to something almost intimate. "When I was 8 years old, my father was murdered in front of me, shot by a rival who wanted to send a message about territorial boundaries. The woman who saved my life that night was a housekeeper who barely knew our family. She hid me in a supply closet, lied to the men searching for survivors, and then walked me 6 miles to a safe house because she couldn't afford cab fare." Maya's breath caught at the unexpected confession, at the vulnerability of sharing something so personal with someone he'd met hours ago. "That woman could have turned away," Dominic continued, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that burned through her defenses. "Could have pretended she saw nothing, saved herself from the danger that came with protecting a dead man's son. Instead, she chose courage over self-preservation. She chose to help a terrified child because it was right, not because it was safe. The parallel was unmistakable. Maya had made the same choice tonight that a housekeeper had made decades ago, and Dominic Varro had become the man he was partly because someone had refused to look away when he needed help most. "You see yourself in me," Maya said, understanding dawning, with painful clarity. "In what I did tonight, I see someone rare." Dominic's voice carried weight that made her pulse quicken, despite the circumstances. Someone who acts on instinct for good even when every rational calculation argues for silence. In my world, such people are nearly extinct. They get exploited or eliminated, their courage mistaken for weakness by predators who don't understand its value. The admission felt like both compliment and warning, an acknowledgement that her actions had earned his protection, while simultaneously marking her as the kind of person his world typically destroyed. "What happens now?" Maya asked, the question encompassing everything from the next hour to the rest of her life. "I can't go home, can't go to work, can't pretend tonight didn't happen." "What exactly are you offering?" Dominic's expression shifted into something calculating. The vulnerable father replaced by the strategic businessman who'd built an empire from the ashes of his own tragedy. "Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we will assess. The Castellanos will learn that their operation failed, that 3 of their people are missing, and that I now possess my son unharmed. They'll also learn about you, the witness who documented their failure, which makes you a priority target for elimination." The clinical description of her impending death should have terrified Maya. Instead, she felt a strange calm settling over her thoughts, the same focused clarity that had carried her off the loading dock and around that corner with her phone raised. "And in your assessment," she pressed, needing to understand the full scope of her situation, "what options exist for someone in my position?" Dominic considered her question with the seriousness it deserved, treating her as an equal participant in decisions about her own fate, rather than a problem to be managed. Option 1. Complete relocation. New identity, new city, new life. My resources can make Maya Chen disappear and create someone else in her place. Your grandmother would need to come with you, obviously. The process takes approximately 3 weeks if rushed, longer if done properly. The idea of abandoning everything, her education, her community, the grave where her grandfather was buried, struck Maya as a kind of death in itself. Survival at the cost of erasing the person she'd spent 26 years becoming. Option 2, Dominic continued, protected integration. You remain in Chicago under my organization's security umbrella. Different apartment, adjusted routines, constant surveillance that you'll learn to ignore. Your grandmother stays in Lincoln Park. You continue your education with armed escorts who blend into campus crowds. Essentially, you live your life under witness protection administered by people who are significantly more competent than federal marshals. Both options assumed she would accept his protection indefinitely, would become dependent on resources controlled by a man, whose business interests included activities that her criminal justice coursework had prepared her to prosecute. "What about option 3? Maya asked. "The one where I take my grandmother and disappear on my own terms, without your resources or your surveillance or your strings attached?" Dominic's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes acknowledged her resistance with something like respect. "Option 3 gets you both killed within 48 hours. The Castellanos have resources nearly equal to mine, and your face is now in their database. Every airport, every bus station, every train platform in the Midwest will have people watching for Maya Chen and an elderly woman matching your grandmother's description. You'd make it perhaps as far as Milwaukee before they found you." The brutal honesty should have felt like manipulation, like pressure designed to force her toward options that served his interests. But Maya recognized the truth beneath his words. She'd seen the coordination of his own people tonight, the speed with which they'd transformed a crime scene into empty pavement. The Castellanos would move with similar efficiency, and she had nothing to counter such resources except a phone full of evidence that would only make her more dangerous to them. "Why do you care which option I choose?" Maya asked, cutting to the heart of her confusion. "You saved your son. I helped make that possible. We're even, by any reasonable calculation. You could walk away right now and owe me nothing." Dominic was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving across the loading dock, the alley, the city skyline glowing against low clouds. When he spoke, his voice carried something she hadn't heard before: uncertainty. "I've spent 23 years building walls around myself and everyone I care about. Walls of money, power, violence when necessary. I tell myself they're protection, but they're also isolation. Marco is growing up in a fortress, raised by security, personnel and tutors because I'm afraid to let him exist in normal spaces where normal people might harm him. His confession surprised Maya with its rawness, with the admission of fears that most men in his position would never acknowledge. Tonight, a normal person saved his life. A cashier who makes $12 an hour and lives with her grandmother to split rent. You saw something wrong and acted to fix it, not because of what I could offer you, but because you couldn't live with yourself if you stayed silent. Dominic turned to face her fully, and Maya saw moisture in his eyes that he made no effort to hide. I care which option you choose because people like you shouldn't have to disappear or live under guard because they did something good. And because my son is going to wake up tomorrow asking about the woman who helped save him, and I'd like to tell him she's safe. That the world still has people worth believing in. The weight of his words settled over Maya like a physical presence, reshaping her understanding of the choice before her. This wasn't just about survival. It was about what kind of person she would become in the aftermath of tonight's violence, whether she would retreat into hidden safety or find a way to remain herself despite the dangers surrounding her. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, wisdom earned through decades of displacement and rebuilding. You don't run from who you are. You carry it with you wherever you go, and you make sure it survives. I need to see her, Maya said finally. My grandmother. I need to explain what happened, make sure she understands this wasn't random violence. She survived enough wars to know when someone's being hunted. She deserves the truth from me directly. Dominic nodded, the gesture carrying acceptance and something like relief. I'll take you to her myself. My shoulder needs proper treatment anyway, and the Lincoln Park property has medical facilities that rival most hospitals. He extended his hand toward the alley where a vehicle waited, the gesture strangely formal given everything that had passed between them tonight. Maya descended the loading dock steps on legs that felt steadier than they had any right to, her decision still incomplete, but her immediate direction clear. First, her grandmother. Then, the choice that would reshape everything. The Lincoln Park property wasn't a house but a compound, 3 connected brownstones that had been purchased and renovated into a single secure residence. Maya counted 7 security personnel between the street and the front entrance, each dressed casually enough to blend into the wealthy neighborhood while carrying weapons visible only to trained eyes. Her grandmother sat in a sunroom at the property's rear, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that probably cost more than their monthly rent, a cup of tea steaming on the table beside her. Chen was 73 years old, small and fierce and possessed of eyes that had watched empires rise and fall without ever losing their sharpness. Aya, Lin said when Maya entered, switching to Cantonese for the comfort of their private language. They told me you were safe, but I needed to see for myself. What have you gotten yourself into, child? Maya knelt beside her grandmother's chair, taking the weathered hands that had held her since childhood. I helped someone tonight, someone powerful. And now his enemies want me dead. Lin's expression didn't change, her familiarity with such situations evident in her unsurprised acceptance. This powerful man. Is he the one who brought me here? The one whose people treated me like a guest instead of a prisoner? His name is Dominic Varro. Maya saw no point in hiding the truth from someone who'd navigated political violence before Maya was born. His son was kidnapped. I helped save the boy's life. Now I'm involved in something I don't fully understand. Lin studied her granddaughter's face with the penetrating gaze that had always seemed capable of reading thoughts. This man, he's not like the others you've dated. Not soft. Not safe. The observation caught Maya off guard, its implications extending beyond tonight's events into territory she hadn't considered. I'm not dating him, grandmother. I barely know him. You know him well enough to risk your life for his child. Lin's words carried the weight of decades spent observing human nature. And he knows you well enough to protect the people you love before you asked. Such knowledge comes faster than you think, child. Especially in dangerous times. Maya opened her mouth to protest, but Lin's raised hand silenced her. I'm not telling you what to do. You're old enough to make your own choices, and smart enough to understand their consequences. But I've seen this before, in my own country, in my own youth. When violence reshapes your world, you discover who you truly are, and who you might become, if you're brave enough. Dominic appeared in the sunroom doorway, his shoulder now properly bandaged beneath a fresh shirt, his appearance restored to something approaching the controlled businessman she'd first encountered at her register. But Maya saw differences now. Hairline fractures in his armor that revealed the man beneath. Your grandmother has a standing invitation to remain here as long as she chooses, he said, addressing Lynn with the respect typically reserved for elders in Maya's own culture. The medical staff can manage her cardiac condition, and the garden apparently meets her standards, though she's already criticized the arrangement of the rose bushes. Lynn's eyes sparkled with something that might have been approval. A man who takes criticism about landscaping without offense. Rare quality in someone with power. A woman who offers criticism without fear of consequence. Equally rare. Dominic's response carried genuine warmth, an ease with Lynn that Maya hadn't expected given his usual, controlled demeanor. You two have met already, Maya realized, watching the comfortable exchange between her grandmother and a man she'd assumed would feel foreign to everything Lynn represented. He sat with me for 30 minutes while his doctor treated that shoulder, Lynn confirmed. We discussed tea, gardens, and the proper way to fold dumplings. He knows more about my homeland's cuisine than most Americans with graduate degrees in Asian studies. Dominic's expression held faint embarrassment at this revelation, a crack in his usual composure that Maya found unexpectedly endearing. My housekeeper for 15 years was from Guangzhou. She insisted I learn to appreciate what she called real food rather than the American interpretation. The domesticity of this detail, a crime boss debating dumpling techniques with his housekeeper, added layers to Maya's understanding of who Dominic Varro actually was beneath his reputation. Dangerous, yes, but also someone who valued the people around him enough to learn their culture, their preferences, their expertise. Mrs. Chen, Dominic said, shifting to formal address. I need to borrow your granddaughter for a private conversation. There are decisions to be made about her safety, and she deserves information that shouldn't burden you unnecessarily. Lynn's gaze sharpened at the implication that she might be too fragile for difficult truths, but she nodded after a moment's consideration. Go, but remember what I said, child. Dangerous times reveal dangerous truths. About others and about yourself. Maya followed Dominic through corridors that felt more residential than she'd expected. Family photographs on walls, children's artwork in frames, evidence of a life beyond the violence that surrounded his public reputation. They passed Marco's room. The door cracked enough to reveal the boy sleeping peacefully in a bed that looked too large for his small frame. A woman in scrubs keeping vigil in a nearby chair. He'll have nightmares for weeks, Dominic said quietly, pausing outside his son's door. Possibly months. Children process trauma in ways adults don't fully understand, and the memories he'll carry from tonight will shape him in ways I can't predict or prevent. The vulnerability in his voice cut through Maya's remaining defenses, revealing a father who understood that saving his son's body was only the beginning of a much longer recovery. He has you, Maya offered, the words feeling inadequate but true. Parents who love their children are the best medicine for trauma. That's what my psychology professors say, anyway. Dominic's gaze found hers, holding it with intensity that made her breath catch. You study psychology? Criminal psychology, specifically. I wanted to understand why people do terrible things. Maybe find ways to prevent them. Maya laughed without humor. Though tonight's experience suggests my academic understanding might need some practical revision. They entered what appeared to be a study, walls lined with books that looked actually read rather than decoratively arranged, a desk covered in papers that suggested real work rather than performed importance. Dominic gestured toward a leather chair while he poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter. The Castellano family is run by a man named Victor Castellano. Dominic began, handing her a glass she accepted but didn't drink from. We've had territorial disputes for years, usually resolved through negotiation and occasional demonstrations of force. But Victor's son Anthony has been pushing for escalation. The kidnapping tonight was his operation, approved by his father, but primarily designed to establish Anthony's reputation as someone capable of striking at his enemies' hearts. Maya absorbed this information, fitting it into the framework of criminal organization psychology. She'd studied in classrooms that suddenly felt very far away. They took your son to prove the younger Castellano could hurt you personally, to establish him as a threat rather than just a subordinate. Exactly. Dominic settled into the chair across from her, his wounded shoulder clearly still causing pain despite his efforts to hide it. Anthony Castellano is 31 years old, ambitious, and frustrated by his father's more cautious approach to expansion. The kidnapping was supposed to force concessions from me, while simultaneously demonstrating Anthony's value to the family hierarchy. But it failed, Maya said. His men are dead, your son is safe. And now Anthony has to explain to his father why a supposedly foolproof operation ended in complete disaster. Worse than disaster. Dominic's expression carried satisfaction beneath its controlled surface. One of the men I killed tonight was Victor Castellano's nephew. Family blood, spilled in a botched operation that Anthony personally authorized. The political consequences within their organization will be significant. Maya processed the implications, understanding that tonight's violence had shifted power dynamics in ways that extended far beyond her own involvement. Anthony will be desperate to salvage his reputation, which means he'll come after you with everything he has, trying to prove the failure wasn't his fault. And he'll come after you. Dominic's words confirmed what Maya had already understood. The witness who documented his failure. The loose end whose existence proves the operation was compromised from inside. Eliminating you becomes essential to the story he'll try to tell his father about tonight. The coldness of the analysis should have terrified her, but Maya found something in Dominic's directness. His refusal to soften reality with false comfort. You said there were decisions to make about my safety. What do you need from me to help you make them? Dominic studied her for a long moment, as if recalculating assessments he'd already made. I need to know what you're willing to accept. Protection requires surveillance. Safety requires restriction. The more secure I make your life, the less freedom you'll have to live it on your own terms. Maya considered this trade-off, recognizing the honest framing of choices that most people would have obscured with reassurances. What does protection actually look like? Day to day, I mean. Not the emergency measures, but the ongoing reality. Armed escort whenever you leave secured locations. Your movements are tracked by GPS and monitored by people trained to recognize threats. Vehicle inspections before you enter any car. Digital security that includes monitoring your communications for anything that suggests compromised contacts. Each element Dominic listed felt like a bar in a cage, regardless of how necessary the bars might be. You're describing a prison, Maya said quietly. Comfortable, well-intentioned, but still a prison. I'm describing survival. Dominic's tone carried no apology. The alternative is the freedom to die on your own terms, which is a choice I won't judge but also won't facilitate. If you want to walk away from my protection, I'll give you money, resources, and my genuine wish for good luck. But I won't pretend that path leads anywhere except eventual violence. The starkness of the options should have been manipulation, should have felt like pressure designed to strip away her autonomy. But Maya recognized the truth beneath his words. He was offering her reality rather than comfortable lies, respecting her intelligence enough to show her exactly what she faced. How long? She asked. How long does protection last before the threat diminishes enough for normal life to resume? Dominic's hesitation before answering told Maya everything she needed to know. Truthfully? I don't know. The Castellanos won't forget, but they might eventually prioritize other concerns. Months, probably. Perhaps years. Perhaps longer if Anthony's position in the family hierarchy changes in ways that maintain his focus on revenge. Years. The word landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through Maya's understanding of what she'd been pulled into. Years of armed escorts and tracked movements and monitored communications. Years of looking over her shoulder, wondering if every stranger was a threat, unless she chose to disappear, to become someone else in some other city where Maya Chen had never existed. There's another option, Dominic said, reading something in her expression. One I haven't mentioned because it's unconventional and potentially inappropriate given the circumstances. Maya's attention sharpened at the shift in his tone, the uncertainty creeping back into his voice. Tell me. You could work for me. The words emerged carefully, as if Dominic was testing their weight in the air between them. Not in the obvious capacity. Nothing involving the aspects of my business that would compromise your principles or your career ambitions. But my organization has legitimate operations, security consulting, risk assessment, corporate intelligence. Your psychology background and your observational skills would be valuable in ways that don't require compromising what you believe. The offer surprised Maya with its specificity, its acknowledgement that she might want something beyond protection, that her skills and education might have value independent of the crisis that had brought them together. You're offering me a job, she said slowly, testing the concept. As an employee of your legitimate business operations. As an employee with security that comes standard because all my senior personnel operate under protection. Dominic's explanation revealed the strategy. Beneath the offer, your safety becomes organizational rather than personal. Your restrictions become professional rather than imposed. And your grandmother remains in Lincoln Park under the same protection extended to the families of all my trusted staff. The elegance of the solution struck Maya as both genuine and calculated. She would be protected because she was valuable, not because she was a liability. Her restrictions would feel chosen rather than forced. And her grandmother would be cared for indefinitely as a standard benefit rather than an exceptional arrangement. This is manipulation, Maya said, but without anger. Sophisticated, thoughtful manipulation, designed to make me feel like I'm choosing rather than being trapped. Dominic didn't deny the accusation. All persuasion is manipulation of some form. The question is whether the outcome benefits you or only serves me. I believe this serves us both. And if I refuse? If I take the relocation option instead? New identity, new city, no connection to you or your organization? Then I'll make it happen and wish you well. Dominic's voice carried something that sounded almost like sadness. You saved my son's life, Maya. Whatever you decide, that debt doesn't disappear. I'll honor it in whatever form you choose. Maya sat with the weight of her decision, feeling its implications settle into her bones. Outside the study's windows, Chicago's skyline glittered with lights that no longer looked the same as they had yesterday. The city had revealed hidden layers, shadow networks, and violent hierarchies that existed beneath the surface she'd always known. I need time, she finally said. Not weeks, but more than this moment. I need to sleep, think clearly, talk to my grandmother when we're both rested. I need to understand what I'm choosing before I commit to it. Dominic nodded, accepting her need for deliberation with grace that surprised her. The guest suite on the 3rd floor is prepared for you. Your grandmother is in the room beside it. Take whatever time you need. The decision isn't one that should be made in the aftermath of trauma. He rose, moving toward the study door, but paused before opening it. For what it's worth, Maya Chen, I hope you stay. Not because of what you can offer my organization, but because Marco will wake up tomorrow asking about the woman who helped save him, and I'd like to tell him she's still here, that the courage he witnessed tonight exists in someone who chose to remain in his world rather than retreat to safety. The admission carried vulnerability that Maya suspected Dominic rarely showed anyone, the father speaking rather than the businessman or the crime boss. That's emotional manipulation too, she said, but with a smile that took the edge off the accusation. Dominic's answering smile transformed his face into something almost boyish. Guilty as charged. Good night, Maya. Sleep came harder than Maya expected, her mind racing through scenarios and calculations until exhaustion finally claimed her near dawn. She woke to sunlight streaming through windows that offered views of a garden her grandmother had apparently already claimed as territory for improvement. The guest suite was larger than Maya's entire apartment, decorated with understated elegance that suggested wealth comfortable enough with itself not to demand attention. A closet held clothes in her size, tags still attached, selected by someone who'd apparently researched her preferences before she'd even agreed to stay. Her grandmother was already in the sunroom when Maya descended, engaged in animated conversation with a security guard who seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about the garden's inadequate use of vertical space. You look rested, Lynn observed when Maya joined her. Better than I expected, given everything. Maya accepted tea from a staff member who appeared and disappeared with practiced discretion. I have a decision to make. About staying, about working for him, about what comes next. Lynn's eyes sparkled with the wisdom that decades of survival had honed. You've already decided, child. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. Before Maya could respond, footsteps announced Marco's play. Approach. The 7-year-old appearing in the sunroom doorway with the hesitance of a child unsure of his welcome. His dark eyes found Maya immediately, holding her gaze with an intensity that reminded her powerfully of his father. You're the lady from the store, Marco said. Papa said you helped save me. That you were brave when most people would have been too scared. Maya set down her tea, giving the boy her full attention. Your papa did the brave parts. I just gave him some information that helped. Marco moved closer, his small frame still carrying tension from the previous night's trauma. Papa says information is as valuable as action. Sometimes more. He says knowing things is how smart people protect themselves. The recitation of his father's philosophy from such young lips struck Maya as both touching and slightly heartbreaking. This child was being raised in a world where such lessons were necessary, where understanding leverage and intelligence might someday save his. Life again. Your papa is a very smart man, Maya said carefully. But do you know what else is valuable? Being kind to people even when you're scared. That's what you did last night, staying calm, being patient, waiting for help. That takes a special kind of strength. Marco's expression shifted, confusion replacing his attempt at composed maturity. I wasn't strong. I was crying the whole time. I thought Papa wasn't coming. I thought. His voice broke, and Maya moved without thinking, kneeling to bring herself to his eye level. Crying when you're scared doesn't mean you're not strong. It means you're human. And waiting, even when you're terrified, even when part of you wants to give up, that's the bravest thing anyone can do. Tears spilled down Marco's cheeks as the previous night's terror finally found its release. Maya opened her arms instinctively, and the boy collapsed into them, small body shaking with sobs he'd apparently been holding back since his rescue. Lynn watched the scene with knowing eyes, and when Maya looked up, she saw Dominic standing in the hallway, his expression carrying an emotion so raw it transformed his face entirely. Gratitude, wonder, and something deeper that Maya wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. The words meant only for her across the space between them. Maya held his son and understood, with sudden clarity, that her grandmother was right. She'd already made her decision. She just hadn't admitted it to herself yet. 3 weeks after the night that changed everything, Maya Chen stood in the conference room of Varro Security Consulting, reviewing threat assessments for a corporate client whose problems seemed almost quaint compared to her own recent experiences. The transition from grocery store cashier to security analyst had happened faster than seemed reasonable, but Dominic's organization operated on timelines that bent to necessity rather than convention. Her criminal psychology background proved more valuable than she'd anticipated, her ability to read behavioral patterns and anticipate threat responses, earning respect from colleagues who'd initially viewed her with suspicion. The corner office she'd been assigned overlooked Michigan Avenue, a view that still felt surreal when she paused to consider how dramatically her circumstances had shifted. Her grandmother had settled into the Lincoln Park residence with surprising contentment, claiming the garden renovation project required her personal supervision and couldn't possibly be completed if she relocated elsewhere. Maya suspected Lynn simply enjoyed having staff who brought her tea exactly when she wanted it, but she didn't argue. Her grandmother was safe, comfortable, and apparently thriving under conditions that most people would find restrictive, but Lin Chen found refreshingly secure. Marco had become an unexpected constant in Maya's new life. The boy appeared at her office most afternoons, ostensibly doing homework at a small table she'd set up near the window, but really seeking the presence of someone who'd witnessed his worst moment and still treated him as strong, rather than damaged. His nightmares had decreased over the past weeks, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. Maya had recommended a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, and Dominic had hired her within hours, installing her in an office on the same floor so Marco could access therapy without the security complications of traveling to external appointments. The gesture was typical of how Dominic operated. Problems identified, solutions implemented, resources allocated without hesitation. His wealth removed obstacles that would have blocked ordinary people for months or years, creating a world where needs were met almost before they could be fully articulated. Maya found herself simultaneously grateful and unsettled by such efficiency. The speed of response, the anticipation of requirements, the seamless integration of her, grandmother and herself into protected infrastructure. All of it spoke to resources and planning capabilities that extended far beyond legitimate security consulting. She never forgot what Dominic Varro actually was beneath the tailored suits and generous benefits packages. But she also couldn't forget the father who'd wept silently while his son slept, the man who'd shared childhood trauma to explain his protection of a stranger, the employer who remembered her coffee preferences and asked about her grandmother's health with genuine interest. The duality was becoming harder to reconcile as her feelings grew more complicated. Cole Marchetti appeared in her doorway, his expression carrying the tension that had become constant since the Castellano situation remained unresolved. "We have a problem. Conference room in 5. Maya saved her work and followed, finding Dominic already seated at the head of the table with surveillance photographs spread before him. His shoulder had healed, over the past weeks, though she'd noticed him favoring it occasionally when he thought no one was watching. "Anthony Castellano has made contact with someone inside our organization," Dominic said without preamble. "We intercepted communications 2 hours ago that confirm an active asset feeding information about our operations, our security protocols." and our personnel movements. The words landed like physical blows, their implications spreading through Maya's understanding of the past 3 weeks. Every security measure she'd trusted, every protection she'd relied upon, potentially compromised by someone working alongside her. "How long has the asset been active?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain professional despite the fear coiling in her chest. "At least 6 months, based on the intelligence Castellano appears to possess." Dominic's tone carried cold fury beneath its controlled surface. "Long before the kidnapping." This wasn't a reaction to recent events. It was infrastructure. "Someone's been building a channel into my organization for half a year, and I missed it entirely." Cole pulled up additional documents on the conference room screen. "The communications we intercepted reference specific details about property security, personnel schedules, and transportation routes. Whoever's feeding this information has access to operational planning at a senior level." Maya's mind raced through possibilities, her psychology training engaging despite the personal stakes. The kidnapping wasn't just about Marco, it was a test. Anthony wanted to see if his asset's intelligence was accurate, if the security vulnerabilities they'd identified were real. Dominic's eyes found hers, respect flickering through his expression. "Exactly. The operation failed because Iris's warning reached me in time, not because of any security measures. If you hadn't passed me that receipt, Anthony would have proof that his insider's information was reliable. Instead, he has 3 dead men and questions about how I knew to counter their approach, which means he'll be pushing his asset for explanations," Cole added, "demanding to know how the warning reached you, who the leak in his own operation might be. The pressure on our insider will be significant. Pressure creates mistakes," Maya said, seeing the strategic opportunity even through her fear. "If Anthony is demanding answers his asset can't provide, the asset might take risks they'd normally avoid. Might expose themselves trying to gather information that satisfies their handler." Dominic nodded slowly, the calculation in his eyes suggesting he'd already reached similar conclusions. "Which is why we're not going to plug the leak immediately. We're going to feed it carefully selected information and watch where it flows." The counterintelligence approach made tactical sense, but Maya recognized its implications for her personal safety. "If we don't identify and remove the asset," they continue, "reporting on everyone in this organization, including me, including my grandmother. Your security is being enhanced as of this morning," Dominic assured her. "Additional personnel, modified routes, increased surveillance on your grandmother's residence. But you're right that the threat level has escalated beyond what we originally assessed." Maya absorbed this information, feeling the walls of her protected existence closing tighter around her. More guards meant more restriction. Enhanced surveillance meant less privacy. The price of safety kept rising, and she wasn't sure how much higher she could afford to pay. "There's something else," Cole said, his tone shifting to something almost reluctant. "The communications we intercepted contained a specific reference that you need to see." He pulled up a transcript on the screen, and Maya's blood ran cold as she read the highlighted passage. "The Chen woman remains priority. V's attachment is obvious. Leverage potential significant. Recommend acquisition when opportunity presents." Acquisition. The clinical term for kidnapping, applied to her with the same casual calculation that had been applied to Marco 3 weeks ago. "They're planning to take me," Maya said, the words emerging steadier than she felt. "To use me against Dominic the same way they used his son." "They're considering it," Dominic corrected, though his jaw had tightened in ways that suggested the distinction brought him no comfort. "The communication is strategic discussion, not operational planning. But yes, you've been identified as a potential vulnerability. V's attachment is obvious." The phrase echoed in Maya's mind, its implications extending beyond immediate danger into territory she hadn't fully acknowledged. Anthony Castellano's people had observed Dominic closely enough to recognize something that Maya herself had been trying to ignore. Whatever existed between them had become visible to outside observers, and that visibility made her a weapon to be used against him. "I should leave," Maya said, the words feeling like glass in her throat. "Relocate the way you originally offered. If I'm not here, if I'm not obviously connected to you, the leverage disappears." "The leverage transfers," Dominic countered. "They'd pursue you wherever you went, using threats against you to influence my decisions from a distance. Your proximity allows me to protect you. Your absence only makes protection more difficult." The logic was sound, but Maya recognized the other truth beneath his strategic reasoning. He didn't want her to leave. The attachment his enemies had identified wasn't one-sided. "Then we need to end this," Maya said, forcing herself to focus on solutions rather than the terrifying vulnerability of her situation. Not just manage it, not just react to each new threat. We need to identify the asset, expose them, and eliminate the Castellano threat entirely. Cole's eyebrows rose at her directness, but Dominic's expression carried something closer to approval. "What are you proposing?" Maya's criminal psychology training surged forward, weeks of academic theory suddenly crystallizing into practical application. Anthony Castellano is operating from insecurity. His father didn't fully authorize the kidnapping. The failure made him look incompetent. Now he's desperate to salvage his reputation, which is why he's pushing so hard for information about me, about how his operation was compromised. Desperate people make emotional decisions, Dominic observed, following her logic. They prioritize vindication over strategy. Exactly. Anthony needs a win. Something that proves his judgment was sound, that the kidnapping only failed because of factors beyond his control. If we can give him what looks like an opportunity for that win while actually controlling the entire scenario, we draw him out, Cole finished. Let him think he's executing a master plan while we're actually directing every aspect of the operation. Dominic's eyes never left Maya's face as she outlined her thinking. You're suggesting we use yourself as bait. Let Anthony believe he has an opportunity to acquire you, then trap him when he commits. I'm suggesting we give him what he wants, Maya confirmed, her voice carrying conviction she wasn't entirely sure she felt. Or what he thinks he wants, the appearance of vulnerability, the illusion of opportunity. Meanwhile, your people are positioned everywhere he can't see them. The conference room fell silent as the implications of her proposal settled over everyone present. Maya was offering to put herself in direct danger, to become the focal point of an operation that could easily go wrong in ways that ended with her dead. No, Dominic's response was immediate and absolute. I won't risk you that way. There have to be other approaches that don't involve placing you at the center of violence. What approaches? Maya challenged, finding courage in the analytical framework that made her fear manageable. Wait for Anthony to make his move on his timeline, in circumstances he controls? Hope your enhanced security is enough to stop professional operators who've been studying your defenses for 6 months. Every day we're reactive is a day they have advantage. She's not wrong, Cole said quietly, earning a sharp look from Dominic that would have silenced most people. The asset inside our organization gives them intelligence we can't fully counter. They know our patterns, our personnel, our protocols. Waiting for them to act means fighting on ground they've chosen and prepared. Dominic rose from the table, moving to the windows where Chicago spread beneath winter-gray skies. His posture carried tension that Maya had learned to read over weeks of closer observation than either of them had expected. 3 weeks ago, you were a cashier who'd never held a weapon, he said, his voice quiet enough that Cole had to lean forward to hear. Now you're proposing to serve as bait in an operation against one of Chicago's most violent criminal families. Do you understand what you're volunteering for? Maya approached the windows, standing close enough that she could see his reflection in the glass. I understand that my life changed the moment I handed you that receipt, that there's no version of my future that doesn't include the danger you've brought into it. The only choice I have is whether I face that danger passively or actively. Dominic turned to face her, and Maya saw the conflict playing across features that usually revealed nothing. The strategist recognizing the tactical value of her proposal, the man who'd grown to care for her recoiling from its risks. If we do this, he said slowly, each word measured, you follow every instruction without question. You wear communications equipment at all times. You stay within extraction range of my people, and if anything goes wrong, anything at all, you abandon the operation and let them protect you. Maya nodded, accepting terms that felt reasonable given what she was proposing. Agreed, but I need something from you in return. Dominic's eyebrow rose slightly. Name it. When this is over, when Anthony Castellano is no longer a threat, I want to understand what I've become part of. Not the sanitized version you share with legitimate employees. The real scope of what you do, who you are, what I'm protecting, and what I'm protecting it from. The request landed between them with weight that exceeded its words. Maya was asking for truth that could never be untold, knowledge that would bind her to his world in ways that employment contracts and security protocols couldn't capture. You might not want what you're asking for, Dominic warned. Some truths are easier to live without, and some truths are necessary to live with, Maya countered. I can't make informed choices about my future if I only understand part of the world I'm choosing to inhabit. Cole had retreated to the far side of the conference room, recognizing that the conversation had shifted beyond operational planning into something personal. His discretion gave Maya and Dominic space that felt increasingly intimate, despite its professional setting. When this is over, Dominic agreed finally. Full truth, nothing hidden, every ugly reality that I've spent years trying to keep from contaminating the people I care about. The commitment felt like a vow, weighted with implications that extended far beyond information sharing. Maya heard what he wasn't quite saying, that he cared about her in ways that made truth-telling feel like intimacy rather than mere disclosure. Then let's start planning, she said, pulling back from the emotional precipice before either of them fell completely. How do we make Anthony Castellano believe he's winning while we're actually destroying him? The operation came together over 4 days of intensive planning, every detail scrutinized and rehearsed until Maya could have executed her role in her sleep. The scenario was elegant in its simplicity, a fabricated vulnerability in her security, a carefully crafted opportunity for the insider to report, and a location where Anthony's people would believe they had advantage, while Dominic's forces controlled every sightline and exit. The insider had been identified through subtle surveillance adjustments that revealed who was reporting Maya's movements to Castellano contacts. Marcus Webb, Dominic's head of security for 8 years, a man who'd been trusted with the safety of everyone in the organization. Maya had met Webb several times since joining Varro Security Consulting. He'd seemed professional, competent, utterly unremarkable in ways that now felt like deliberate camouflage. His betrayal had apparently begun after his gambling debts had reached levels that legitimate income couldn't address, debts the Castellanos had purchased and converted into leverage. The knowledge that someone so trusted had been working against Dominic for months added layers of complexity to the operation. Webb knew security protocols intimately, knew how to identify surveillance, knew the patterns that Dominic's people relied upon. Any trap they set had to account for his expertise or he'd recognize it immediately. The solution was brutally simple. Don't try to hide the operation from Webb. Instead, feed him information designed to make Anthony overconfident. Maya's apparent vulnerability would be a routine trip to visit her grandmother, traveling with reduced security because the usual team had been reassigned to a higher priority protective detail. Webb would report this reduction as a genuine opportunity. Anthony would commit resources to an acquisition attempt, believing he had inside intelligence about security gaps. What Webb wouldn't know was that the higher priority detail had been fabricated entirely, that the reduced security team included Dominic's most capable, operators disguised as junior personnel, and that every building along Maya's route had been quietly staffed with additional forces waiting for the operation to begin. The morning of the operation arrived with weather that felt appropriate for violence. Gray skies, cold wind off the lake, the kind of Chicago winter day that kept sensible people indoors. Maya dressed carefully, choosing clothes that wouldn't restrict movement, while still appearing normal for a casual visit to her grandmother. The communications equipment was invisible, woven into fabrics that looked like ordinary clothing, transmitting her location and heartbeat to monitoring stations staffed by people prepared to intervene at any sign of trouble. Dominic appeared at her apartment as she finished preparations, his presence unexpected given how carefully they'd structured the operation to appear routine. "You don't have to do this," he said, standing in her doorway with tension visible in every line of his body. "There are other ways, slower, messier, but ways that don't put you directly in harm's path." Maya finished securing the small tracking device disguised as a pendant around her neck. "We've been over this. The plan is solid. Your people are positioned. The only variable is whether Anthony takes the bait. The variable is whether anything goes wrong." Dominic's voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Raw fear dressed in the language of strategic concern. Operations never proceed exactly as planned. There are always factors we didn't anticipate, responses we couldn't predict. Maya approached him, close enough to see the pulse beating rapidly in his throat despite his controlled expression. "You've run operations like this before. You know the risks and you've accepted them for other people. Why is this different?" The question hung between them, demanding acknowledgement of truths they'd been carefully avoiding for weeks. "Because it's you." The words emerged like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep, somewhere Dominic rarely allowed anyone to see. "Because 3 weeks ago you were a stranger who handed me a receipt, and now you're someone I can't imagine losing. Because watching you walk toward danger feels like watching my own heart stop beating." The confession struck Maya with force that stole her breath. Confirmation of feelings she'd suspected but hadn't dared to name. "I know," she said quietly. "I feel the same way. But that's exactly why this has to end. As long as Anthony Castellano is out there, as long as his insider is feeding information about our lives, we can't build anything real. We're just surviving, waiting for the next threat, never able to trust that tomorrow is actually ours." Dominic's hand rose to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. "If anything happens to you, it won't," Maya's conviction surprised even herself. "Because you'll be watching. Because your people are the best at what they do. Because I refuse to become leverage against someone She stopped herself before the word escaped, before she committed to something that the chaos of their circumstances hadn't earned yet. But Dominic's eyes told her he'd heard the word she hadn't said. Love. The impossible, irrational development of love in the midst of violence and fear, growing despite every reason it shouldn't exist. "Come back to me," he said, the command carrying weight that exceeded its words. "Whatever happens out there, whatever choices you have to make, come back." Maya pressed a kiss to his palm, feeling the warmth of his skin against her lips. "I will. I promise." The reduced security team moved with Maya through Lincoln Park, their pace casual despite the tension humming beneath professional calm. Two operatives walked 20 feet ahead, appearing to be a couple enjoying a winter morning. Two more followed at similar distance, their attention seemingly on phones while actually monitoring approaching vehicles. Maya herself was wired with enough surveillance equipment to fill a small electronics store, every sound and movement captured and transmitted to the command center, where Dominic watched with barely controlled anxiety. The attack came faster than expected. Between the third and fourth blocks of her route, a van pulled alongside the street with the suddenness that screamed professional coordination. The doors opened before it stopped moving, figures in dark clothing emerging with weapons drawn and movements rehearsed. "Contact, contact, contact," someone said into comms, the calm voice belonging to one of the operatives posing as a morning jogger. Maya's training took over, dropping her stance and moving toward the building entrance her briefing had identified as the primary fallback position. But the men from the van were faster, intercepting her before she could reach cover. Hands grabbed her arms with bruising force, a hood dropping over her head as she was dragged toward the vehicle. She heard gunfire, felt the van's floor beneath her knees, tasted the fabric of the hood as she screamed against it. Then the van was moving, accelerating through streets that Dominic's people should have controlled, and Maya felt the first genuine terror she'd experienced since the night at the grocery store. Something had gone wrong. The response team hadn't intercepted in time. The backup forces hadn't engaged. She was actually being taken. The hood prevented orientation, but Maya forced herself to track details: turns, acceleration, braking, the voices speaking above her in Italian-accented English. 5 minutes, maybe 6, before the van stopped and she was dragged out onto what felt like concrete. Industrial space, she assessed from the echoes. Warehouse or factory. Somewhere the screaming wouldn't be heard. The hood came off in harsh fluorescent lighting, revealing a space that confirmed her assessment. Abandoned manufacturing facility, equipment, rusted and forgotten, windows painted black or covered with plywood. And Anthony Castellano, standing 10 feet away with the satisfied smile of someone who believed he'd finally proven himself. "Miss Chen," he said, the name carrying mockery she refused to acknowledge. "You're more difficult to acquire than I expected. My men tell me your security team actually put up a fight before we eliminated them." Eliminated. The word hit Maya like a physical blow. The operatives who'd been protecting her, professionals she'd trained beside for the past week, dead because the operation had gone wrong in ways nobody had anticipated. "Dominic Varro will destroy you for this," Maya said, finding strength in the certainty that vengeance would come even if she didn't survive to see it. "Whatever you think you're accomplishing, you're only accelerating your own death." Anthony's smile widened, the expression of someone too arrogant to recognize warnings. "Varro will do exactly what I tell him to do, because I have something he wants, and I'm not his 7-year-old son this time. You're leverage that can speak, that can scream, that can beg in ways that will break him completely." The threat was clear enough, but Maya refused to give him the satisfaction of visible fear. "You tried this approach 3 weeks ago. It failed. What makes you think the result will be different?" "Because this time, I have help from inside his organization." Anthony gestured, and a figure emerged from shadows that Maya recognized with a shock that must have shown on her face. Marcus Webb, Dominic's head of security, walking toward them with the confident stride of someone who'd chosen his side and committed completely. "The extraction team reported mission success," Webb said, addressing Anthony while his eyes remained on Maya. "But we have a problem. Varro's people aren't responding the way we expected. They're not scrambling, not panicking. It's almost like they knew this was coming." Maya's heart rate, which had slowed slightly as she adjusted to her situation, suddenly accelerated again. Webb's observation was accurate. If Dominic's people weren't reacting chaotically, if they weren't showing the desperation that should accompany her kidnapping, it meant the operation might still be unfolding according to plan. Just a plan that had evolved beyond what she'd been briefed on. Of course they knew, Anthony dismissed, his arrogance preventing him from hearing the warning in Webb's words. "They knew there was a leak. They've probably been watching you for weeks, trying to figure out how information was flowing. But knowing doesn't matter when the leak has already given us everything we need." Webb's expression shifted slightly, doubt creeping into features that had been confident moments before. "Something feels wrong. The extraction was too clean. No pursuit, no emergency response, no coordination from Varro's forces. It's like they wanted us to succeed." The realization struck Webb at the same moment Maya understood what had actually happened. The elimination of her security team hadn't been real. The capture had been allowed to proceed. The operation had been designed from the beginning to place her exactly where she was now, in Anthony Castellano's custody, in a location that Dominic's forces had almost certainly identified and surrounded. She was still bait, just deeper in the trap than she'd expected to go. "You need to kill her now," Webb said urgently, reaching for the weapon at his hip. "We need to—" The first gunshot came from somewhere above, a sniper's precision removing Webb's hand before he could draw. His scream echoed through the warehouse as blood sprayed across concrete, the wound instantly debilitating. More shots followed, systematic and coordinated, taking out Anthony's men with efficiency that spoke to extensive training and superior positioning. Bodies dropped around Maya as she threw herself flat, covering her head while the operation she'd helped design unfolded with lethal precision. Anthony Castellano proved more capable than she'd expected, returning fire toward positions he couldn't actually see, backing toward what he apparently believed was an exit. But when he reached the door, Dominic Varro was waiting for him. The confrontation lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Anthony raised his weapon, but Dominic was faster, crossing the distance between them before the younger man could fire, disarming him with a movement that seemed to bend the rules of physics. "You took my son?" Dominic said, his voice carrying across the warehouse with cold clarity. "You plan to use her the same way. And you corrupted a man I trusted for nearly a decade." Anthony's response was the desperate bargaining of someone who'd finally recognized his own mortality. "My father will—" "Your father has already been contacted." Dominic's interruption was absolute. "Informed that his son's unsanctioned operations have created complications that threaten the stability of agreements your family depends upon. He's disavowed you, Anthony. Publicly and permanently." The words hit Anthony harder than any physical blow, his face draining of color as he understood what they meant. No rescue coming, no family protection, no leverage remaining. "Please," Anthony whispered. The arrogance of moments ago completely evaporated. "I'll give you whatever you want. Information, territory, anything." "You have nothing I want," Dominic said, "except your absence from my world." The final shot was almost anticlimactic. A single report that ended Anthony Castellano's life and his threat simultaneously. Maya pushed herself up from the concrete floor, her hands shaking as the adrenaline that had sustained her began to ebb. Around her, Dominic's people emerged from positions she hadn't known they occupied, securing the warehouse with the same choreographed efficiency she'd witnessed the night of Marco's rescue. Dominic crossed to her immediately, his hands running over her body with desperation that had nothing to do with tactical assessment. "Are you hurt?" "Did they—" "I'm fine." Maya's voice cracked on the words, emotion breaking through the control she'd maintained throughout her captivity. "They grabbed me, put me in the van, brought me here. No violence beyond the initial takedown." His arms wrapped around her with force that should have felt constraining, but instead felt like safety, like home. "I lost communications for 90 seconds during the extraction. 90 seconds where I couldn't hear your heartbeat, couldn't see your location, couldn't confirm you were still alive." The confession revealed how close he'd come to abandoning the plan entirely. to charging in regardless of strategic positioning, because the thought of losing her had overwhelmed every other consideration. "I'm here," Maya whispered against his chest. "I came back. I promised." Webb's groaning drew their attention to where the wounded traitor lay clutching his ruined hand. Dominic's expression hardened as he looked at the man who'd sold them to their enemies. "Take him somewhere secure," he ordered the approaching operatives. "He has information I need about who else might be compromised. Keep him alive until I've extracted everything useful." The implications of that instruction were clear enough, but Maya found she couldn't summon sympathy for someone who'd betrayed people to violence and death. And the rest? Cole Marchetti appeared, blood on his jacket but apparently uninjured. "Victor Castellano's people are requesting a meeting. The old man wants to negotiate peace now that his son isn't around to complicate matters." Dominic's gaze found Maya's, seeking something in her eyes that she didn't fully understand. "Tell Victor I'll meet him tomorrow. Tonight I'm taking her home." The Lincoln Park residents felt different when they returned. Familiar walls transformed by the reality of what Maya had survived. Her grandmother was waiting, having been informed of the operation's success, but needing to see her granddaughter with her own eyes before truly believing it. "Aya," Lynn said, pulling Maya into an embrace that belied her small stature. "They told me you were bait, that you volunteered to let them take you. What kind of man lets the woman he loves put herself in such danger?" The word loves hung in the air between all three of them, Lynn's observation cutting through pretense that had become increasingly thin over the past weeks. "The kind of man who respects her enough to trust her judgment," Dominic answered, meeting Lynn's assessing gaze without flinching. "And who had 3 sniper teams, 40 armed operatives, and medical personnel stationed within 60 seconds of her location throughout the entire operation." Lynn's expression shifted from accusation to something approaching approval. "You protected her even while letting her be brave. That requires a different kind of strength than simply controlling." "Grandmother," Maya interrupted, exhaustion making her less diplomatic than usual. "Can we discuss Dominic's character assessment after I've slept for approximately 12 hours? Lynn's knowing smile suggested the conversation was merely postponed rather than abandoned. "Sleep, child. We'll talk when you're rested." All 3 of us. The guest suite felt both familiar and strange as Maya entered. The room she'd occupied for weeks now waited with new meaning. She'd chosen to stay here, chosen to become part of this world. And tonight, that choice had nearly cost her everything while simultaneously proving that she belonged. Dominic appeared in the doorway as she sat on the bed, his hesitation unusual for someone who typically moved through spaces with absolute certainty. "I can leave you to rest," he said. "Or I can stay, whatever you need." Maya considered the question, considered everything that had passed between them since a torn receipt had changed the trajectory of her existence. The danger wasn't gone. Victor Castellano still led a family that might seek revenge, despite any peace negotiations. Webb's interrogation might reveal additional threats they hadn't anticipated. The world Dominic inhabited would never be fully safe. But she'd chosen this world, chosen him. And the choice felt right in ways that transcended rational analysis. "Stay," she said, extending her hand toward him. "You promised me truth when this was over. And I think we both have things we need to say." Dominic crossed the room and took her hand, lowering himself onto the bed beside her with movements that suggested he was finally allowing his own exhaustion to show. "I love you." The words emerged without preamble, without the elaborate context she might have expected. "I've loved you since you handed me that receipt with hands that shook but never hesitated. Since you walked toward violence rather than away from it because a child needed help. Since you looked at my world with clear eyes and chose to remain anyway." Maya's breath caught at the directness of his confession, at the vulnerability visible in his features as he waited for her response. "I love you too," she admitted, the words feeling simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. "Against every rational judgment, despite knowing exactly who you are and what you do. I love the father who cries when his son is safe, the man who remembers how his housekeeper liked her dumplings, the strategist who builds backup plans for his backup plans because losing people is unbearable." Dominic's hand rose to her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with tenderness that seemed impossible for hands that had killed earlier tonight. "The world I live in will never be fully safe," he warned. "There will always be threats, always enemies, always the possibility of violence touching the people I love. That's the truth I promised to share. I can't offer you a normal life. I can only offer you a life with me, protected as completely as I know how to protect, Loved as completely as I'm capable of loving. Maya turned her head to press a kiss against his palm, echoing the gesture she'd made that morning before walking into danger. I don't want normal, she said. I want real. I want a partner who trusts me with truth, who respects my capabilities, who doesn't try to lock me in a tower because he's afraid of losing me. I want you, Dominic. All of you, including the parts that most people would run from. His kiss, when it came, carried everything words couldn't fully express. Relief and passion, promise and possession, the mutual surrender of two people who'd found each other across impossible circumstances. When they finally separated, both breathless, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. Marco's been asking when you'll officially move into our home, he said. He's convinced you need a room next to his so you can be the first person he tells about his nightmares. And so he can be the first person you tell about yours. The mention of Marco added layers to what Dominic was offering. Not just partnership with him, but motherhood to a child who'd already claimed her as family. A complete transformation of the life she'd known into something entirely new. Your home, Maya repeated. Not this residence, your actual home, where Marco lives, where you return after operations and business, and all the things you do that I'm still learning to understand. The offer of truth extends to everything, Dominic confirmed. Full access, complete transparency, the ugly realities alongside whatever beauty we can build together. If you want it, Maya thought of her grandmother's words about dangerous times, revealing dangerous truths, about discovering who you truly are when circumstances strip away all pretense. She'd discovered that she was brave enough to save a child, strong enough to survive captivity, capable of loving a man whose world terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. I want it, she said, all of it, the protection and the danger, the luxury and the violence, the man and the empire he's built. I want to be your partner, Dominic. In everything. His smile transformed his face into something that made her heart ache with its beauty. Then welcome home, Maya Chen. Welcome to our world. The sun was setting over Chicago when Maya finally emerged from the bedroom the following evening, more rested than she'd been since the night everything changed. The Lincoln Park residence hummed with the quiet activity of staff who'd learned to move invisibly through spaces occupied by people who valued privacy. Her grandmother was in the garden despite the winter chill, directing a landscaper who seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about seasonal plantings. Marco had apparently been informed that Maya was sleeping and had left a stack of drawings outside her door, images of castles and knights, and a recurring figure with dark hair who seemed to be protecting smaller figures from various threats. Dominic found her studying the drawings, his expression soft, in ways that still surprised her when they appeared. He processes through art, he explained, settling beside her on the hallway bench. The therapist says it's healthy, that the images show him working through fear by imagining protection. Maya traced the outline of the protective figure in one drawing, recognizing herself in the dark-haired woman standing beside the knight. He's put me in his castle. He's put you in his family, Dominic corrected. Which is where you belong, if you'll have us. The question carried weight beyond its casual delivery, an official invitation to the life they'd discussed in exhausted whispers the night before. I'll have you, Maya said, leaning her head against his shoulder. Both of you. And whatever comes with being part of whatever this actually is. Dominic's arm wrapped around her, pulling her closer. What this actually is complicated. I won't pretend otherwise. But it's also mine, and now it's yours. A kingdom built on shadows and secrets, protected by people willing to kill and die for the family at its center. And at the center of that family, you, Dominic said simply. Me, Marco. Your grandmother, who I'm fairly certain has already begun planning our wedding despite not having been informed of any engagement. Maya laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. Grandmother doesn't wait for formalities. She sees what she wants and starts planning how to get it. A trait she shares with her granddaughter. Dominic's voice carried warmth that had become increasingly familiar over the past weeks. Speaking of planning, Victor Castellano's representatives have agreed to terms that ensure lasting peace. His son's death is being attributed to internal family conflict, and the territory disputes that started all of this have been resolved in our favor. The clinical summary of complex violence and negotiation reminded Maya of how much she still had to learn about the world she'd joined, but the reminder didn't frighten her the way it might have weeks ago. And Webb? She asked, needing to know the fate of the man whose betrayal had nearly cost so many lives. Dominic's expression hardened briefly before deliberately softening. He provided useful information about other potential vulnerabilities, and then he experienced the consequences of betraying people who trusted him. The euphemism was clear enough. Maya filed it away as another truth she'd chosen to live with, another ugly reality that came attached to the beauty she was building with the man beside her. "Marco wants to show you his room," Dominic said, shifting to lighter topics. "He's spent all morning organizing his toys so you can see how mature he is now." Apparently, maturity is indicated by alphabetizing action figures. Maya smiled, warmth spreading through her chest at the image of a 7-year-old preparing to impress her. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting." She rose, extending her hand to Dominic in an echo of their first real conversation weeks ago. He took it, standing with the fluid grace she'd come to recognize as fundamental to who he was. "Together?" he asked, the word carrying weight beyond its surface meaning. "Together," Maya confirmed. They walked toward the sound of a child's excited voice, toward the life they were building from the ashes of violence and fear, toward a future that would never be ordinary, but would always be theirs. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.